It's 1979, and a Soviet military officer named Stanislav Petrov is sitting in a classroom that smells like chalk and cigarettes, staring at a computer manual that is 3 inches thick. He is not supposed to be here. Petrov had joined the Soviet Air Defense Forces because he wanted to fly. He had the grades, the physical fitness, the aptitude scores. But somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of the Soviet military, a decision was made that Stanislav Petrov would not fly planes, he would study computers. He would become an engineer. He would spend his career in rooms with no windows, analyzing data from satellites he would never see. He was furious about it for years. But here's the thing about Stanislav Petrov that will matter enormously later. He was brilliant at it. Not just competent, genuinely brilliant. While other officers learned how to operate the systems, Petrov learned how the systems actually worked. The logic behind the code, the way the satellites processed information, the specific conditions under which the software could get things wrong. He understood the machine's weaknesses in a way that almost nobody else in the Soviet military did. And in 1983, the Soviet military decided that a man with that specific knowledge needed to be working at a very specific place. A bunker. 60 kilometers south of Moscow, buried underground, officially called Serpukhov 15. It housed the command center for the Soviet Union's most important military asset, a network of satellites called Oko, which means eye in Russian. 9 satellites in orbit, watching the United States round the clock, specifically watching the American missile fields in Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota. If the Americans ever decided to launch a first strike, Oko would see it first. It would send the alert to Serpukhov 15, and the officer on duty would have minutes, not hours, not days, minutes to decide whether what they were seeing was real. If they decided it was real, that information went up the chain. And at the top of that chain, Soviet leadership would launch everything they had. This was called launch on warning. You hit us, and before your missiles even land, we hit you back. Both sides reduced to ash simultaneously. Nobody wins, nobody survives. The whole system depended on the satellites being right. And Petrov, better than almost anyone else in the Soviet military, knew the satellites were not always right. Now, before we get to the night everything nearly ended, you need to understand what the world looked like in 1983, because without that context, the story doesn't make sense. And also, do like and subscribe if you don't hate me. The Cold War had been running for nearly 40 decades. The United States and the Soviet Union had spent those decades building enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet several times over. Both sides knew this. Both sides kept building anyway. But 1983 was different. 1983 was the year that genuine, serious, credible people on both sides started to believe that actual nuclear war might actually happen. In March of that year, President Reagan stood in front of a microphone and called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Not a diplomatic description, not careful political language. Evil empire. The Soviets heard that and understood it as the language of a man preparing his population for war. 2 weeks later, Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a program to build weapons in space that could shoot down Soviet missiles. The Soviets heard that and understood it as America trying to eliminate their ability to retaliate. If you can shoot down our missiles, mutual assured destruction stops working. If mutual assured destruction stops working, you can attack us without consequences. The Soviet leadership began to genuinely believe that the United States was planning a first strike. Then, on September 1st, 1983, just 25 days before the night we're heading toward, a Soviet jet fighter shot down a Korean passenger aircraft, Flight 007, 269 people on board, including a United States congressman, dead. The Americans were furious, the Soviets were defensive and frightened. Relations between the two countries collapsed to a level not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis 20 years earlier. Every Soviet military installation went to heightened alert. Every radar operator, every satellite technician, every officer on duty at every facility that touched nuclear weapons was told the same thing. The Americans might be coming. Be ready. Stanislav Petrov heard this briefing. He sat in the same room as his colleagues and listened to the same words, and he nodded. But privately, he thought something that none of his colleagues would have admitted out loud. He thought, our system is not reliable enough for this. September 26, 1983, Tuesday. Petrov arrives at Serpukhon 15 for the night shift and finds out immediately that the officer who is supposed to be on duty has called in sick. He's taking his place. This is not unusual. It has happened before. He signs in, checks the systems, settles into the command chair. The first few hours pass quietly. Petrov drinks tea, checks his instruments, makes small talk with the technicians. Outside in the world, it is the middle of the night. In Montana and Wyoming and North Dakota, American missiles sit in their silos, not moving. Shortly after midnight, the room changes. A siren, not a test siren, the real one. And then the screen above Petrov's station, the screen that is supposed to show no launch detected, shows something else. Launch. One missile, inbound from the United States. The system's confidence indicator, the rating it gives to its own detections, reads high reliability. Every person in the bunker turns to look at Petrov. This is the moment. This is what the entire facility exists for. Protocol is clear. If the system detects a launch, the duty officer reports it up the chain, immediately. Immediately. There is no pause built into the procedure. There is no step that says, wait and think about it. The whole logic of launched on warning is speed. The missiles are already coming. You have minutes before they land. You cannot afford to hesitate. Petrov looked at the screen. He does not pick up the phone. Not yet. Because something is wrong, not with the missiles, with the system alert itself. Petrov's mind, trained to understand the system's weaknesses, is already running through the logic faster than he can fully articulate it. One missile. Just one. He had been briefed hundreds of times that an American first strike would be massive, overwhelming. Hundreds of missiles launched simultaneously to destroy Soviet nuclear capability before a counterattack could be mounted. The whole point of a first strike is that the other side can't respond. 5 missiles doesn't do that. 1 definitely doesn't do that. 1 missile makes no strategic sense whatsoever. He thinks, if this is real, why only 1? He thinks the system is new. I know its weaknesses. I know how it can fail. He thinks the ground radar isn't showing anything. If a missile is actually in the air, the ground radar should be seeing it by now. 45 seconds have passed. Then the screen changes again. Launch, 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 launch. 4 more missiles, now 5 total. The system's confidence indicator still reads high reliability. An alarm that was already screaming gets louder. The technicians are looking at Petrov. His commanding officers in the next room are looking at Petrov. Everyone in the bunker is waiting for him to pick up the phone. He has maybe 9 minutes before the chain of command assumes something has gone wrong with his station and goes around him. He grips the armrest of his chair. 5 missiles is still not hundreds. 5 missiles is still not a first strike. The ground radar is still showing nothing. But the system says high reliability, and the system was built by some of the most sophisticated engineers in the Soviet Union. And he is one man in a bunker making a judgment call that could determine whether 1 billion people live or die. He picks up the phone. His commanding officer answers. Petrov says, I am reporting a false alarm. Silence on the other end. He says it again. False alarm. The system is malfunctioning. There are no missiles. He puts the phone down, and then he sits there in that chair while the sirens keep going and the screens keep showing launch, and every person in the bunker watches him, and he waits. He said later, I felt like I was sitting on a hot frying pan. He couldn't move. He couldn't do anything. He had made the call. Now he just had to be right. 4 minutes. 6 minutes. 8 minutes. If the missiles were real, Soviet radar would be picking them up by now. Soviet radar was showing nothing. The ground was quiet. The sky was quiet. 10 minutes after the first alarm, Petrov was able to say with certainty nothing was coming. He was right. The investigation that followed determined that the OCO satellite system had made a catastrophic error. One of the 9 satellites had been positioned at an angle where sunlight reflecting off the tops of high-altitude clouds looked to the satellite sensors exactly like missile launches from an American base in Montana. The software interpreted reflected sunlight as nuclear war. The most sophisticated early warning system the Soviet Union had ever built had been fooled by clouds. Now here's the part of the story that nobody talks about. Stanislav Petrov saved the world. That is not an exaggeration. The Soviet leadership in 1983 was primed. frightened and fully prepared to believe that America was coming. If Petrov had followed protocol, if he had picked up the phone and said launch detected, high reliability, 5 missiles, inbound, the information would have gone up the chain faster than anyone could question it. Whether Soviet leadership would have launched in response is debated by historians, but the conditions were as close to a yes as they had ever been. He didn't follow protocol. He trusted his own mind over the machine. And he was right. What did the Soviet military do with this information? They reprimanded him for filing his paperwork incorrectly that night. He was not given a medal. He was not promoted. He was reassigned to a less sensitive post.